Time once again for Central Mass Chronicles. Thank you for joining us. I'm Hank Stoltz. On our panel today, Steve Jones, D'Agostino, Randy Feldman, and Roberta Schaefer. We've got a lot to get to. Let's jump right in. Worcester Business Journal and Worcester Magazine taking a look at some of the numbers that have just started to come out. And what these numbers show is that the opioids, just the number of opioids that flooded into cities, whether it be Worcester or Leominster or Gardner, and just pills per person, and neighborhoods that had millions of these pills over a 7-year period leading up to the opioid crisis is just staggering. And Randy, what it just begs the question, how could Big Pharma not know? I mean, when it comes to accountability, when there are that many millions of pills being pumped into cities and again into neighborhoods, they have pharmacies that are within a half mile of each other, each pumping out millions of pills in that 7-year period. How do you not know that a possible outcome is what we have now? Or, listen, I don't know, we've got painkillers, people are in pain, doctors prescribe it, and everything was perfectly legit. What's your take as these numbers come out?
Well, the article from the Worcester Business Journal that talked about that New England was the center of the legal opioid distribution for all of New England, far outpacing Boston, far outpacing everywhere, and that the CVS and the Walgreens over near Webster Square were the prime locations pumping out millions of pills. It is very interesting, right? Now, first you think, okay, pharmacies, like how could you folks do all of this, right? But the more you look into it, the more it was the doctors, right? The doctors, with encouragement from some of the big pharma companies, particularly the one owned by the Sacklers, who produced OxyContin. They're producing this thing, and they know that this is going to lead to addiction, but they think this addiction may be manageable. I don't know what they thought. They're pushing it out.
Okay, it's not clear. I'm not going to defend the Sacklers, but it's not clear that they knew from the beginning that this was going to result in an addiction problem.
Well, the New York Times story certainly made it seem like they knew it and they encouraged it because it was business.
Okay, there are several different parties here. So I agree with you that the pharmacies, they're just the middleman, because they're getting that. It's not like they ordered them without having the demand. Otherwise, they're just sitting there on their shelves.
No, I agree with that. At some point, though, just because Randy, as he brought up, like the Walgreens and the CVS, at some point when it starts to be every man, woman, and child would have X number of pills, or you're in Gardner, do you start? I mean, I don't know. Does somebody at that level start going, "We're pumping out a lot of pills, aren't we?"
So, but the question is, when did we know? Who knew, and when did they know it? Right? When did they find out that this was really creating a problem? How many years before they actually understood
it's an epidemic,
that this is an epidemic? So that has not been resolved yet. When the people at what's the pharmaceutical company?
CVS?
No. The company
the
Sackler
company, PharmaCare. I think it's PharmaCare.
Whatever. Anyway, they obviously
Purdue Pharma.
Purdue Pharma, right? Okay, so they produced this. They were the ones who developed it, and it was approved by the FDA. As you said, it was all legal. And people were having, it came at a time where we were making advances in lots of serious illnesses, cancer in particular, that people were being treated and they needed painkillers afterwards, whether it was surgery or chemotherapy or whatever. And it was used, and I know of people who used it who never got addicted. I mean, it was just, so the question is, you have to separate out the pharmacies who were getting the orders for it, otherwise they wouldn't have, gotten the pills, because otherwise they would just sit on their shelves, and they can't do that. Or the doctors, or the pharmaceutical, or when did the government begin to look at this? So it's a very complicated picture. But the other thing is that I was reading an article by a psychiatrist who said that, we should be able to predict what people are going to get addicted from this, because there's a certain psychological profile. It's not that you just pop one OxyContin and all of a sudden you're hooked.
Right. This seems,
there's
Steve,
also
to be not just sitting on the shelves of the pharmacy. What happened was they started sitting on shelves in the medicine cabinets, and the kids got into it.
Well, there's that, but there's also the distributors. Here's a story on CNBC yesterday, August 6th. Opioid distributors, these aren't the manufacturers, these aren't the pharmacies, these are the distributors. They're about to propose a $10 billion settlement to end these state lawsuits. And it's because in some communities that had a population of maybe 1,200 people, there were 5 million pills in the community.
Yeah. So
I
here's
think
the thing.
So
we had that
those
here.
1,200 people weren't using that 5
Right,
million
and
pills.
it's interesting
Asdol
that you
has
said-
12,000
Okay.
people and 7 million
Okay,
pills.
Right.
So here's
Gardner
the
has
thing.
it's the
22,000.
distributors
Yeah,
that
right.
So now we have another party in here, the distributors.
And they're
but-
McKesson, Cardinal Health, and Amerisource Bergen. Those are the 3 big distributors that are set, according to CNBC, to propose a $10 billion
But again, to come back
settlement.
to, you said a community of 1,200.
1,200.
And 12,000.
And there's one where there was a community of 600 people.
There are lots of very small communities around the state, around the country, in rural areas. And what has happened is the people who live there tend to be, the studies have shown, more depressed, not seeing a future, where they are.
But
because
Roberta, 1,200 people and 5 million
yeah, no.
prescriptions?
But what I'm saying, my point is,
They would have to be taking 100,000 an hour.
No, my point is that what the people are, the idea is to try to identify the kind of people who would be more susceptible to addiction. That's what we're not doing
Right.
yet.
Well, hold on.
But why is there so much? Why are there so much opioid pills and other forms of it in the pipeline to begin with?
Well, hold on. Let me give you a number. In 2012, the CDC, right, the Center for Disease Control, said there was 259 million prescriptions filled out of a nation of 300 million people for opioids. So
where's my prescription? I didn't get it.
I didn't get one. Right.
Now, how about let's go to Lou Evangelitis at the Worcester House of Corrections. 90% of the inmates at the Worcester House of Corrections are addicted to drugs, and that's why they're there. And he said that the vast majority of them are addicted to opioids.
And the distributors were also accused in these lawsuits by the states of overstating the benefits and understating the side effects from it.
I mean, let's assume that at first they didn't know what the side effects. I mean, they knew that there
Well,
was
maybe
some,
10, 20, 30
They
years
knew
ago,
people
but
were getting
in
addicted.
recent years,
They knew
they've
people were
known.
getting addicted. They didn't know what that addiction would end up being, end up turning into.
Right. No. And so the question is, how do you assign responsibility, guilt, accountability?
Right.
I mean,
so
it's
big pharma, doctors. I mean, where does it
Hit them with huge billion-dollar penalties.
Does a city like Worcester go after all of them to try and recover some costs?
But here's the problem of
Make
doing that.
Make them eat it at the bottom line.
Here's the problem with doing that. There is another effect of all the suits and everything, and whether any of these companies actually go out of business. I think we all know that it takes a tremendous amount of money to be able to develop a drug in the first place and go through all
Something
the
like,
stages.
I think, $3 billion
yeah,
on average
and then
now.
go through all the stages, the years that it takes before.
And that's assuming that it even gets approved by the FDA.
Before the FDA will approve it.
Right.
This kind of thing, if the suits are going to have an effect on drug companies getting into this in the first place.
Well, actually, what's happening now is with the Human Genome Project and the CRISPR project, we're going to be having designer drugs that you can do for $1,000 instead of $3 billion. We're still a few years away from that, but that'll put the big pharma out of business and put them into some other business.
Right now
probably.
is if we start to recover some of these costs of what the opioid epidemic has cost Worcester, for example, because you have people who then, okay, the OxyContin from the medicine cabinet has run out. Heroin's cheaper on the street than OxyContin.
Right. Absolutely.
Although the heroin is cut, so that's the problem there. It's cut
fentanyl
and if you can't get it, there's the black market.
Right.
Apparently, 21 million Americans have a substance abuse addiction or an opiate addiction, a substance abuse disorder. And of those 21 million, does anybody want to guess what percentage of people are in treatment?
Probably
very
about
little.
1 million?
10%.
10%.
Yeah.
10%. So you want to know what to do with that money when the lawsuits get resolved? I guess Worcester and Massachusetts and everyone else, we should put that money into treatment.
Well, and next time we'll talk about clean injection sites and some of the other things that Commonwealth is looking at. Here, we'll be talking about community benefits agreements straight ahead.
You can't get Worcester weather from a Boston TV station. The sun could be shining in downtown Boston, but the weather could be very different here in Worcester. People tell me all the time how much they count on our weather forecast, and we know how important that is to our Worcester News Tonight viewers. Each weekday, we'll give you your weather, your 10-day forecast for right here in Worcester, only on Worcester News Tonight.
Worcester's only local forecast, weeknights on Worcester News Tonight.
Skies this one to left center field. See you later. Got him with a slow knuckleball.
Line drive into right field. Out goes the second baseman Urania, but he can't get it. Follow the Paw Sox all season long with select games from Charter TV3 and visit chartertv3.com for a complete game telecast schedule. Presented by Cantiani Insurance Agency, Bay State Savings Bank, and the law offices of Joseph J. Cariglia.
Local news from Central Massachusetts for Central Massachusetts.
Worcester police are asking for the public's help as they investigate a shooting.
A porch fire in Worcester displaces 8 residents.
Towns are reaping the benefits of the state's growing marijuana business.
It was a warmer day in the city Tuesday, and temperatures are only expected to rise.
Reporters in the field. And an in-depth local forecast. Worcester News Tonight on Charter TV3.
So let's talk now about community benefits agreement, and this is much in the news when it comes to Polar Park being built. I'm going to start with Roberta and have her kind of set up what a CBA is, then give her an opinion on whether it's needed or not.
Okay. A community benefits agreement consists of, well, let me just define it in Worcester. I mean, there are many across the country, but it's a group of organizations that come together that are making demands of the developer. It's not supposed to involve the government because it's supposed to be not something that the government is going to put money toward. And the group in Worcester, which is called the Worcester Community Labor Coalition, is a group of primarily unions, construction, nurses, maybe teachers, all kinds of people who are in the construction business, and some faith-based organizations, and some other sorts of hangers-on who think that they need to be sitting at this table and see what they can get out of it. So
some people call them social justice advocates.
Okay, so first of all, to make it, both Randy and I wrote columns on this, so I took one position and he took another. And what I found interesting in his piece was that he likened this group to the kind of thing that Alexis de Tocqueville talked about in Democracy in America. And he's dead wrong. Tocqueville did not have this kind of thing in mind. Tocqueville was talking about voluntary organizations that were going to do something good for the community, something that they were going to bring. For example, build a hospital, build a school, work with all the social service agencies that came into being at the early part of the 20th century, starting in New York for helping immigrants and so on. It was not an organization that they themselves say, either you give us these things or you won't have labor peace. And that means that they'll disrupt the development if they don't get what they want. Okay, now what do they want? So far as they have a manifesto, and in this manifesto they talk about that they want union jobs. Yes, there'll be a few non-union workers on the job at some point if they get the contracts, but primarily union workers. And in Massachusetts, that eliminates 80% of the workers who are non-union. They want programs for the homeless and education programs to get them jobs, as if we don't have a whole lot of those already. They want you to buy local. So even if it costs the developer more money to buy local, you should do that at all costs. And by the way, if the developer doesn't make the money that he thinks he's going to on this development and has to put it toward these things, then if he runs out of money on these things, it comes to, and the city can't pay off the bonds because the city is the bondholder on Polar Park, then it comes to the taxpayer. So in the end, it does affect the rest of the community. It's not just, it can't just be a private agreement, but that there will be an effect on the rest of the community at the end of it. I will let Randy take over. Just
Yeah, you said you had the opposite view.
Yeah.
And we'll get Steve.
Yeah.
But,
So you know, in general, what it is, Roberta described correctly. What it is, it's putting it another way. It's a group of people, and they are across the nation, that have been doing this in cities, big and small, saying that we want social development to accompany economic development. We don't look at development just as a real estate project or an economic entity, but we want social development at the same time. They do not call it a manifesto. They are not going back to Karl Marx.
Well,
they
there
call
is
it an agenda.
Okay, excuse me, there are a list of things.
I knew what you meant.
So yeah, but it matters
use language in different
because you know
ways,
when
these
people
ways.
say they're the socialists, right? You know, what I mean that's a
I didn't
dispersion.
use that word.
No, but the manifesto, Karl Marx implies that. We can talk about de Tocqueville later. You're somewhat right on de Tocqueville, but we can talk about it later. Okay, all right. But what they really want, right, is. And the reason that Worcester CBA is a little different than most is many do involve the government because a lot of times it's land that the government controls. And that controlled land is going to be given to a developer. And the issue is going to be, is this going to be pure economic now that the government has participated in the project, right? And our project is exactly like that, right? The city is going to build a stadium and a private developer is going to build apartments and an office, and they're going to do it together as a project. And the question is, the city can come to terms with the Worcester Community Labor Coalition, but will the private developer, Madison Holding, will they also join in the same agreement? And that's part of the negotiations going on now. What I was shocked and surprised to learn is that they've already agreed that all the work there will be done under prevailing wage. All the construction work will be under prevailing wage.
It has to be.
So if it's all under prevailing wage, it's all at those high wages. Like what that would be is like a laborer would get $35 an hour, and with benefits they get $65 an hour. A skilled craftsperson would get $45 an hour. With benefits it's $75 an hour. Since that's settled, and that it's going to be union and non-union people in the project, so the question is, if the city has basically sort of conceded and assented to all of that, will Madison Properties also assent to that? So that the wage part is, and the wage, the Madison Properties and Larry
Now,
Lucchino,
Madison, and we'll bring Steve in, but so Madison Properties and the Worcester Red Sox do this out of the goodness of their heart.
well, Larry
The Red Sox
Larry
are not
Lucchino,
involved at all.
No, it's
yes
not
and no,
involved, it's
yes
not.
and no, yes and no. Larry Lucchino is very, you know, every job in Fenway is a unionized job. He's very familiar with the union's influence. It's a lot stronger in Boston than in Worcester, right? But he's going to be in charge of any cost overruns, but apparently it's not just the cost of the stadium, it's ones that he has a work order that's going to change something that he'll be responsible, the Red Sox will be responsible for those cost overruns. So the wage part of this...
Hold it. The city took out the bond for $100 million or whatever it was.
110.
110.
Yeah.
The city is on the hook for 110. And the park is being built. Obviously, the city can't build the park, and they have to contract it out to a developer. If there are, if they, and the park isn't even involved in this CBA because he took a pass on it.
No, I think it's both. The park and Madison Properties are both going to be involved.
No, Madison, the park is out of it because they're going for Madison Properties, which is a separate entity from the park. The city is hoping that the money from Madison Properties will be enough to pay back the $110 million.
Steve, jump in
And the
in
Red
here.
Sox
I mean, I don't know why they would give the
Let me propose
park
an
a pass.
alternative. an alternative to the CBA, which would be a project labor agreement. And that's where you have both union labor and non-union labor can be working on the project. The prevailing wage is required. Non-union labor companies, non-union labor has to be paid by the contractors. Again, the prevailing wage, and then the non-labor. Let me finish.
Yeah.
And the non-labor and the labor union people have to pay. The non-union labor has to pay the union dues for the length of the project. And finally, the contractor has to follow union rules on pensions, work conditions, and dispute resolution, again, for the length of the project.
First of all,
so that would be an alternative to the CBA.
Yeah, let me explain that.
Which makes more sense to me.
The research bureau, sorry.
But you can allow, with a CBA, you have to let it's only union labor. With a
No.
with
Our
a
CBA is for
you
non-union
can-
labor.
okay,
given-
or you do a
much
project
more
labor
than that.
agreement.
The
But
project-
as long as the non-union labor is allowed in there, as well as the union labor,
The project
and prevailing wages.
It
The
is.
project labor agreement, the Research Bureau wrote about this years and years ago, and we won on this issue. This was
You won what on you?
Well, let me explain. The people running the Voc School project
Right.
wanted a project labor agreement on that. The courts have said, unless there is a complicated project that, for example, in the case of schools, and this was a Fall River project where there were multiple schools involved and they had to move the kids and so on, a project labor agreement could be done on that. But on a single project where you don't have, that you have to destroy buildings and move people and so on, a project labor agreement is not legal. And so if the city said they're doing a project labor agreement, the people would immediately take them to court and it would be over.
right,
When
we
you
got
say a
a-
single
not-
project, you mean the
We got about
ballpark is a single
30
project,
seconds.
or the whole thing
Small
is a single
part- no, they're
project?
separate
Randy,
because there's
projects.
also the
So
hotel.
they're
Hold on a
separate-
second,
they're
because
separate-
we're moving on.
buildings.
Are we getting a CBA?
Yeah, there's going to be a CBA.
Is there going to be a CBA?
No.
Is there going to be a CBA?
Probably.
All right. Coming up, we're going to talk about Worcester Magazine. Is it now gone from more politics to the entertainment section of the Telegram? Have we lost a weekly voice when it comes to covering the city? And we'll talk about that straight ahead right here on Central Mass Chronicles.
Scoreless into the third, and that's when Smith makes a great diving catch, jubilant diving catch, redonkulous diving catch, super duper diving catch.
That was sensational.
Sensational diving catch.
Elizabeth Warren talks about the 1%. She is the 1%. Now, if you really are so concerned about the little guy and the average guy and the middle income person, where are you? Too bad that our own Congressman, Jim McGovern, doesn't have the fortitude to stand up and speak on behalf of the people in his community. They all go to Congress with no money in their pocket, and they all leave there as millionaires. How does that happen?
We have something bad, we don't try to make it better, and we just say, that's what we deserve, we're Worcester. Elizabeth Warren is just about as warm as the shores of Lake Quinsigamon in January. Hey, there's been some big reform on Beacon Hill. Guess what? We don't pay state reps and senators to drive to work anymore.
All right, Steve, talk to us a little bit about Worcester Magazine. You've got certainly some experience in your background with the weeklies. Worcester Magazine, Gatehouse comes in, buys up the Telegram. They also now own Worcester Magazine. People were concerned about, are we going to lose a local voice?
And they just bought Gannett for
Right.
$1.4 billion, which owns USA Today.
Right, exactly. So other weeklies, and so we're concerned about consolidation. This is now, do we have Worcester Magazine becoming more of the entertainment section of the Telegram. The Telegram got rid of their Go section. Now you can get Worcester Magazine on Thursdays as kind of an insert, and the blurring of the lines between who works for Worcester Magazine and who works for the Telegram has been really kind of obliterated. I mean, I think, you really have Telegram staff now running Worcester Magazine. So have we lost a local voice? Or listen, some people may prefer the fact that Worcester Magazine is going to be more entertainment oriented and weren't into the politics anyway.
Well, both the Telegram and Gazette and Worcester Magazine are increasingly doing infotainment instead of news. And increasingly these large chains like Gatehouse Media, Gannett, which they just bought, are getting into the infotainment business. If you're going to run a self-governing nation and you don't have a well-informed populace, a well-informed citizenry, a well-informed voter base, how the heck do you do it? You don't. It doesn't work. It's dysfunctional. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we have some difficulties with our local government here in Worcester.
So they have a moral responsibility.
They have a moral responsibility. They have a constitutional responsibility under the First Amendment to do it.
But
to provide news, not just infotainment.
Right. And Roberta, though, I mean, they are definitely, without a doubt, moving to these multi-platforms. They just had the Woo Challenge, for example.
Right.
You have a paper that is able then to promote your event. You have a lot of people come out, and you make a bunch of money on the event. So they're moving into different areas. They, used to have all these advertising agencies. Now the TNG, for example, kind of has their own advertising agency.
Okay, so Steve is absolutely right in terms of the lack of local news. And I don't just mean the climbing up the hill or whatever they did, the Woo Challenge or whatever. That's nice news. It makes people feel good.
Well, it's a way for them to make a dollar too.
Okay, but what we're missing now, and it's been missing from the Telegram for quite some time, is a serious local section, and they now have only one columnist who writes about local issues. When he decides to write about local issues, they're always from the left perspective. You have no balance in the paper. They're not writing their own editorials. They're getting them now from the Cape Cod Times, or it used to be just the Washington Post and Bloomberg, and now we have editorials from little papers that have nothing to do with Worcester.
And the Cape Cod Times is also owned by
Right. No, they're going to grab from anybody, and they now own all of them. So, it could be the little town that you were talking about with 1,200 people has a local newspaper, and they're going to take an editorial from there. Who cares?
Right.
You have, in order for, and local government is incredibly important because that is the level of government which affects people on a daily basis much more than what's happening.
But they have to make a profit too.
I understand.
Well, there's a platform. The Worcester Sun had been an online newspaper. It stopped about a year ago, and then Mark Henderson started up, who had also been running the Worcester Sun, started up the 016.com, 016 referring to the zip code for Worcester. And his model, and we'll see if it works over the next few years, is the 016 is a for-profit, and it's heavily into infotainment. And if he can make enough profit from that, he can use the money to set up a nonprofit and reestablish the Worcester Sun to do news and opinion.
This may show up on the 016.
Right.
The only reason I'm talking over you for a second, Steve, is because I'm going to give Randy the last word because we only have a minute left.
So the tabloidification, which is what Steve is talking about, the information, not information as much as entertainment, certainly going on. It's like local news. It's always been about crimes and this and that. And whether Worcester Magazine is now a little bit more social concern, entertainment concern than it was before, probably yes. Right? There'll probably be less political thing, like Bill Shaner's a great writer. There'll probably be a little less Bill Shaner having as much versatility to write political stories. And the TNG now has made it better as far as what to go on. Like I used to have to go online, which is not my natural way to see what to do in Worcester. But now I can look back in here again and see, now that the Go is combined again
in a year,
with that.
this will be,
but the only thing
this will be Go without any news content.
The discussion will continue here. We'll talk with you next week right here on Central Mass Chronicles.
I just